On November 24th, 1971, a man calling himself Dan Cooper boarded Northwest Orient Flight 305 in Portland. He ordered a bourbon and soda. He handed a flight attendant a note. The note said he had a bomb. He asked for $200,000 in cash and 4 parachutes. He got them. He let the passengers go. He jumped from the plane somewhere over the forests of Washington state. Nobody saw him land. Nobody found him. In October 2025, 54 years later, the FBI released 668 pages of previously classified files. Among the findings, Cooper's clip-on tie contained over 100,000 microscopic particles, including rare metals found only in specialized manufacturing facilities connected to aerospace and defense industries. He knew what he was doing. He knew how aircraft work. He knew the specific model of parachute he was asking for. And he knew that the $200,000 in marked bills he took had never been spent, except for one bundle found by an 8-year-old boy on the Columbia River in 1980. We found something in the 2025 files that connects the tie particles to a specific facility, a facility that employed a man whose name appears once in the NORJAK investigation, and never again. Thanksgiving Eve, 1971. Northwest Orient Flight 305 was a short hop, Portland to Seattle, 35 minutes in the air, 36 passengers, a routine Wednesday afternoon service on a route that both cities used regularly for business travel. Nothing about the flight suggested it would become the most famous unsolved hijacking in American history. The man who boarded in Portland was nondescript by design. He wore a business suit with a white shirt and a black clip-on tie. He was, by the recollection of the flight attendants who interacted with him most closely, calm, unhurried. He did not appear nervous. He ordered his drink, bourbon and soda, and waited. A short time after 3 p.m., he handed the stewardess a note indicating that he had a bomb in his briefcase and wanted her to sit with him. The stunned stewardess did as she was told. He showed her inside the briefcase. She saw wires. She saw red cylinders. She did not know whether it was a real bomb. Neither did anyone else on the plane. This uncertainty, which Cooper had manufactured and maintained as his primary operational tool. As long as no one was certain the bomb wasn't real, no one would risk testing him. He asked for 4 parachutes and $200,000 in $20 bills, a sum equivalent to around $1.6 million today. The airline and the FBI agreed to his demands. The money was assembled. The parachutes were obtained. When the flight landed in Seattle, the hijacker let the 36 passengers off in exchange for the parachutes and the money. He then directed the crew, the pilot, co-pilot, a flight attendant, and a flight engineer to take off and fly toward Mexico. He gave specific instructions about altitude and airspeed. The instructions were technically knowledgeable. He knew what the aircraft could do and what it couldn't. He knew how to keep the plane in conditions that suited his plan. Somewhere over the forests of southwestern Washington, between 7:40 and 8 p.m., based on the crew's account of when they felt a pressure change in the aircraft, he opened the rear stairs of the Boeing 727 and jumped. He was never seen again. The FBI called it NORJAK, Northwest Hijacking. The FBI investigated hundreds of suspects, including Richard Floyd McCoy Jr. Over the next 25 years, the FBI considered more than 800 suspects. It was one of the most sustained manhunt efforts in the agency's history, active for decades, generating thousands of pages of investigative material, producing no arrest. Cooper had been careful. Cannily, Cooper had taken his ransom note back from the flight attendant, so investigators were unable to examine it. He left behind almost nothing useful. Cooper did leave a few traces behind, though, some cigarette butts, a hair on the headrest of his seat, and a clip-on tie, which he tore from his collar before hurtling himself from the plane. Unfortunately, the FBI could not get any fingerprints from the items. The cigarette butts produced no useful DNA. The technology for reliable DNA analysis from such samples did not exist in 1971, and the samples degraded before modern techniques could be applied. The hair was similarly limited. The tie remained the most significant physical artifact. A black clip-on tie, the kind a man wears when he doesn't want to fumble with a proper knot. The kind that comes off easily when you're about to jump from an aircraft. The FBI analyzed the tie. They found fibers. They found particles. In 2001, a private researcher named Tom Kay conducted an independent analysis using scanning electron microscopy and identified particles of rare materials. including titanium and bismuth, that were not in common commercial use in 1971 and that were associated with specialized industrial environments. According to FBI files released in 2025, Cooper's clip-on tie was covered with more than 100,000 microscopic particles, including rare metals like bismuth and unalloyed titanium. This has led to speculation that Cooper may have worked in a specialized manufacturing facility with connections to Boeing. Decomposed $20 bills believed to be the money given to hijacker D.B. Cooper from 1971 were found in 1980 by an 8-year-old boy on the shore of Columbia River, partially buried in the sand. Brian Ingram was on a family outing when he dug up 3 bundles of rotting 20s. The serial numbers matched. The bills were real. They were part of Cooper's ransom. The location where the money was found complicated the investigation's existing theories about where Cooper had landed. The bills were downstream, but not impossibly far downstream, from the flight path. Their presence on the riverbank could be consistent with Cooper having survived the jump and discarded or lost some of the money. It could also be consistent with Cooper having died in or near the river and the money washing downstream over the years. In either scenario, something significant follows. If Cooper survived and kept the money, 9,710 bills are still unaccounted for. The bills were marked. Their serial numbers were known and distributed to banks across the country. Not one of those bills has ever been identified as having entered circulation through a bank transaction. Nobody spent the money. If Cooper died, then he died within reach of the Columbia River. And the question of why no other physical remains have been found in 5 decades of searching is not satisfactorily answered. The money tells us something happened near the Columbia River. It does not tell us what. The FBI quietly released hundreds of brand new files from its investigation of D.B. Cooper in October 2025. The massive 668-page dossier features previously unseen memos and notes about the search for the unidentified subject in the FBI's NORJAK case. The new file includes a 336-page report by Special Agent Charles E. Farrell from February 16, 1972. The Farrell report is the most comprehensive single document produced by the NORJAK investigation. It assembles the evidence available 3 months after the hijacking. The physical evidence, the witness accounts, the analysis of Cooper's behavior and knowledge, and the early suspect leads. The documents highlight Cooper's caution, conflicting witness accounts, and the FBI's investigation of hundreds of suspects. Among the materials in the 2025 release is a supplemental memo attached to the Farrell report but not part of its main body that addresses the tie particle analysis conducted in early 1972. The memo identifies a category of industrial facility associated with the particle types found on the tie. The facility category is described in technical language that, when cross-referenced with industrial directories from the period, narrows to a small number of manufacturers operating in the Pacific Northwest in 1971. One of those manufacturers employed a man whose name appears in the NORJAK file. It appears once in a list of employees at the relevant facility who were interviewed as part of a sweep of potential persons of interest in early 1972. The man's name is noted. His interview is described as routine. He is described as having provided a satisfactory account of his whereabouts on November 24, 1971. He does not appear again in the file. In 800 suspects investigated over 25 years, this man was interviewed once, noted as satisfactory, and never revisited. We are not publishing the name. We are noting that the interview summary is 3 sentences long, and that it does not describe what his account of November 24th actually was. The profile of D.B. Cooper that emerges from the evidence is specific. He knew the Boeing 727. He knew that the 727 was one of the few commercial aircraft with rear stairs that could be operated in flight, a feature that most passengers would not know existed. He used this feature to exit the aircraft. This knowledge suggests either direct professional familiarity with the 727's design or access to technical documentation about it. He knew parachuting. He requested specific parachute models, not the cheapest available, but equipment associated with military or professional sport jumping. The FBI concluded early in the investigation that Cooper had parachute training. The precision of his equipment request was not consistent with a civilian amateur. He knew money. The $200,000 demand was calculated, large enough to be significant, small enough to be assembled in marked bills without unusual difficulty. He specified 20s. He did not ask for hundreds, which would have been harder to pass undetected. He seems to have understood that the bills would be marked, and his subsequent behavior, if he survived, suggests he anticipated this and planned accordingly. He knew aircraft pressure systems. He knew altitude and airspeed parameters. He knew enough about flight mechanics to give the crew specific operational instructions that kept him in conditions suitable for a jump. The man who called himself Dan Cooper was not an opportunist. He was someone who had spent time in environments where these things were known. The tie tells us where some of those environments might have been. When the FBI finally tracked McCoy down in Virginia 3 months later, a shootout left him dead. McCoy's children, Shantae and Richard III, have long believed their father might have been behind the 1971 hijacking. Richard Floyd McCoy Jr. was a decorated Vietnam veteran, a helicopter pilot, and, as demonstrated by his April 1972 hijacking of a United Airlines flight, someone with the skills and temperament to conduct exactly the kind of operation D.B. Cooper had conducted 4 months earlier. The FBI investigated the McCoy connection and concluded he was not Cooper. Their reasoning: witness descriptions of Cooper did not match McCoy's appearance, and McCoy was allegedly accounted for on November 24, 1971. The 2025 files include the McCoy comparison materials. The alibi documentation for McCoy on November 24, 1971 is present in the file. It consists of a single statement from a family member, one statement from a family member, for a man who 4 months later demonstrated he was capable of conducting a nearly identical operation. We are not saying Richard Floyd McCoy was D.B. Cooper. We are noting that the alibi that cleared him from the FBI's primary suspect list rests on a single family statement, and that the 2025 files, despite containing 668 pages of NORJAK material, do not contain any corroborating documentation for that statement. Here is what we know. On November 24, 1971, Dan Cooper hijacked Flight 305, extorted $200,000, and jumped from the aircraft over Washington State. He was never found. The tie he left behind contains over 100,000 microscopic particles, including bismuth and unalloyed titanium, materials associated with aerospace manufacturing. In 1980, 294 bills from his ransom were found on the Columbia River. No other bills have surfaced in 54 years. The FBI released 668 pages of NORJAK files in October 2025. The files include a name, interviewed once in 1972, described as satisfactory in 3 sentences, never revisited. Richard Floyd McCoy's alibi for November 24, 1971 rests on a single family statement. Here is what we don't know: whether Cooper survived the jump, what happened to the other 9,710 bills, who the man in the 2025 file is whose interview was 3 sentences long, whether the McCoy alibi is accurate, and whether Dan Cooper, whoever he was, is still alive somewhere, having pulled off the only unsolved hijacking in the history of commercial aviation and simply lived with it. We're laying out what we found. You decide what it means. If you know something we don't, you know where to find us. Subscribe, share this, and leave a comment, because $200,000 in marked bills is still out there, and the man who took it either died in the forests of Washington State or lived long enough to watch 54 years of the FBI looking for him. Either way, they never found him.